Hey everybody, today I have Shashi Kiran, who is the CMO at Aryaka Networks. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rajiv. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what Aryaka Networks does.
Well, Aryaka is a company that takes the wide area network, WAN as you call it,
Right?
and allows for it to be delivered like a service.
Mm-hmm.
So it's WAN as a service. And if you're familiar with the notion of cloud computing,
Mm-hmm.
think of it as a cloud first approach to delivering wide area networking.
Got it. And so there's WAN, W-A-N, there's also SD-WAN. Tell us what the difference is between the two.
Well, SD-WAN sort of came about from this whole SDN conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Which is software defined.
which was software-defined
Right.
networks.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, I guess the pain point for that was in the data center,
Mm-hmm.
and the pain point was largely because you had a number of these switches and compute nodes that were having CLI command line interface configuration, and the management complexity of it became overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had a couple of the industry leaders like Cisco and VMware established their own architectures for software-defined networking, and it sort of died down.
Mm-hmm.
But the next wave of it took place in the wide area space,
Okay.
mainly because in the last couple of decades we had multi-protocol label switching (MPLS),
Mm-hmm.
which has been dominant in the WAN, and it gave a lot of predictable performance over wide area networks for applications that were running on it. But the challenge was the complexity of administering it. And so I think the whole notion of SD WAN came into life to really solve that area of complexity,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as organizations started to move towards the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And then it starts to impose demands on agility, and organizations are much more concerned about alignment with digital transformation, how fast can you move,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you're stuck with the provisioning and the complexity of MPLS, then the network ends up holding the rest of the organization hostage.
Got it.
And so how do you make it much more agile? How do you make it much more consumption friendly, cloud friendly?
Mm-hmm.
So that has given birth to SD-WAN.
Got it. And so there's been a lot of talk for companies going through this digital transformation phase across a number of different areas. How is Aryaka sort of helping companies get through this digital transformation as it relates to WAN?
Aryaka, had a very unique vision, and it also manifested itself into a very unique architectural value proposition. And today, we're sort of a different beast out there in the market with all of this SD-WAN noise out there, right? The company originally began offering WAN optimization as a service, and then organically evolved to addressing the space of SD-WAN. What's unique about us is we have our own technology stack. We build our own edge devices. We have our own WAN optimization.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we've built out a global network of highly WAN optimized layer 2 points of presence that are distributed in such a way that it addresses 95% of the world's knowledge workers. And so the combination of this global network with the edge intellectual property that we have and the WAN optimized backbone, complete with a fully managed offering and delivered as a service, that's very unique in the industry.
Got it.
Because you have two camps. One is a set of the box vendors who advocate a do-it-yourself approach to enterprises. Then you have the telcos and the carriers who take these boxes and then stitch it together with security, with WAN-opt, and then try to deliver that as a managed service. The quality of experience there is kind of suboptimal.
Got it.
So we take care of the whole stack integrated and offer a really good quality of experience, and that's really what's been our forte so far.
Okay, so great way to differentiate how you're sort of separating yourself from the Cisco's, VMware's, Silver Peaks of the world. And then just bringing it back to these companies that are figuring out how to sort of cross that chasm when it comes to digital transformation. How are you sort of navigating that path for companies? Where do they start?
Yeah, so for them, they don't really, a lot of the CIOs that we engage with don't necessarily wake up in the morning saying, hey, what do I do with my WAN? It's usually the least of their concerns to begin with. Their thoughts about how do I transform my business model?
Right.
How do I take my company down this path in the most quickest, efficient way possible? And what should my application architecture be, right? That's really what's driving majority of their time and budget. What transpires though is they go down that path and then they realize there is this little thing called the network that isn't moving along as speedily as you want it to. And then suddenly that becomes a huge roadblock. And then they start looking to see how do you, get past that and come to this thing called as SD-WAN, right? And
Sorry to interrupt you, but part of the sort of strategic thinking is knowing that the network needs to also be part of this initiative.
Yeah.
So instead of reacting to it, they need to be more proactive.
Yeah.
Which is part of the holistic plan, which is where you play a part in like solving that part of what they're looking to do.
Yeah. And a lot of it is really to make the network extremely responsive to their needs. Not that they need to go invest in a lot of resources. And particularly when you look at organizations that are having a distributed global presence, they don't necessarily have that distributed expertise spread out. And at the same time, they want to make sure that their different offices, sites need to have a consistent experience, whether it be in terms of their video conferencing, UCaaS, you name it, right, or Salesforce applications. So that's really where they want to make sure that that fundamental aspect of the infrastructure is working. And what we make it very easy for them to do is just say, hey, this is what we need in this site, and we take care of everything else, right? The way I usually talk about it is we centralize that complexity and we distribute simplicity.
I like that.
And that really resonates with their own digital transformation initiatives.
I like that. So as Chief Marketing Officer, we were talking a little bit off camera, one of the things you're working on is sort of the branding and positioning and messaging of the company. So talk to us about how do you sort of view that as it relates to Aryaka? What's the steps and processes? How do you get to a place where you've landed on a brand or messaging that's going to work for this next evolution of the company?
Yeah, so we're in a somewhat noisy market space, right? And part of putting out that whole branding structure is really to get a better sense of identity.
Okay.
Who are you? Do you have clarity in terms of your own identity? So then you can baseline it relative to somebody else and then make it a proactive approach. Because if you are in a reactive mode all the time and you don't have a clear sense of identity, then it's going to come across as very confusing and you're never going to build a better brand. So for me, I'm about 9 months into the company and it's been a very fun ride so far. Part of it was to really understand what is core to our DNA, what is our sense of identity, in a way that we play to our strengths and go on the offensive versus being reactive to the noise out there.
Sure.
And a lot of it has to do with listening to customers and listening to people who are, selling on your behalf and then trying to synthesize that opinion in a way that you can bring clarity in as simple a manner as possible. And then you frame the value proposition around it and start to amplify it. So that's really been at the crux of what we started out with. I feel we're also on the cusp of changing the posture of the company in a way that is aligned to our core. And so it'll be exciting to watch. It's never a done deal, as you know.
Yeah, keeps evolving.
But if it's helping us to take the ball 1 or 2 steps forward in the right direction, that's a great place to be.
Well, clearly it's working. I think you mentioned that today you won an award in Paris, first place. Well, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I woke up today morning to find out that we had won this SD-WAN Excellence Award in Paris. This is from an organization called Layer 123 with the MPLS NFV World Congress. So it was a good validation for some of the things that we've been doing, but it's also, good to wake up to awards and you see that on your phone the first thing in the morning.
Yeah, congrats. So, when you talk about brand identity and sort of going back to being proactive and not being reactive, and listening to the customers. And then, the sales folks are at the front lines. They're hearing a lot in terms of what's working, what's resonating, what's not. At the core, the company started in 2009, I believe. We actually just went through an exercise about sort of thinking about our purpose, right? Which is also at the foundational layer of who you are and what you do, why you do what you do. How does that play into sort of defining your brand and creating sort of this culture and brand identity with employees as well as, external customers and stakeholders?
Yeah, so again, it's an iterative process. A lot of these are intertwined, so you cannot take a brand position purely based on your technology architecture. It has to reflect your people values.
Right.
It has to reflect the culture that the company is holding itself accountable for, and for the people that are leading the company. And most often, if you take a position that is inauthentic, your own people are not comfortable articulating it.
Right.
And it's very hard for you to get the buy-in, and it's a very short-lived branding exercise. So some of the scar tissue we have as marketeers after having been in this field for a few decades is to make sure that you get that sense of alignment, and you have to be sensitive enough to recognize it across the organization. So as messaging is a very nuanced activity.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
very custom, depending on, it's like art in a way, right? It appeals different to different people.
Right, subjective.
And it's very subjective. So when you put out a brand which is in some ways the highest form of expression for the company, it should not end up being the lowest common denominator. In other words, it should not be a diluted effect because you have listened to everybody in the organization and gone about saying yes to everybody.
Right.
And in the process, it's diluted to its lowest common denominator.
Right.
So as somebody who is responsible for shaping, framing the brand, I think it's very important to educate others in the process, keep an open mind, and at the same time be confident enough to say no in certain cases, even if that person is superior to you, your own CEO, and follow through with it, right? So then you have something that doesn't lose its integrity, and you have gotten the buy-in from everyone.
The alignment.
And then you go with something that has longer legs. You want brands to have longevity in the process.
Makes a lot of sense. I like that thought process. So speaking of a couple of decades, you've had quite a journey in your career, and currently you also, not only is Shashi the CMO at Aryaka Networks, but he's also an advisor at Usher. You're an advisor at Front Desk. You're part of the Fabric. You're part of the Forbes Technical Council. You're quite a busy guy. So, tell me a little bit about how do you sort of run your responsibility as a CMO and also advising, these startups and.
Yeah. So you have to be sensitive to your own time as well as the time that you give to others as well, right? And in a way that it provides mutual value. For me, I really look at it as a very connected ecosystem. All of these things are interconnected. And at some point, we start to plateau on our own learning. We hit our own glass doors. Right. Then you need to see what is it that will allow you to continue to learn, and in a way that you add value to your own career, but also the company that you're associated with. And I've been very fortunate in my jobs. First of all, I feel very lucky with the career that I chose, because I could have gone down to become a software programmer. My basic degree was in engineering. Almost 99% of my colleagues went into computer programming. I chose a marketing career. And so I felt that somehow it was playing to my strengths, and I went down that path, right? And so when you start to come down that, you have to say, what is it that will allow you to contribute very proactively? And just this ecosystem, being associated with startups allows you to bring some principles of startups into bigger companies. I've had my share of bigger companies. And then the kind of big company scale that you want to bring into startups. And cross-pollination of these ideas, if you can get at that, it allows you to shortcut a lot of the processes,
Mhm.
take short circuits in a way that you don't have to make all the mistakes that everybody else did, right?
Right, right.
So I find that incredibly enriching. And fortunately, being here in the Bay Area, it allows us to do that, where you know, can interface with a number of ideas, minds, people who are willing to share.
Right.
And you know,
Right.
some of them find value in what I say, so they do take me onto their advisory boards and things like that.
Yeah, it's a thriving ecosystem.
It is.
It's a great way to cross-pollinate,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, which is sort of taking these elements from startups and bringing them to larger companies, and vice versa. How do you help startups scale from what you've learned at larger companies and how they achieve that scale? Is there anything along those lines that you've brought to Aryaka that's helped?
Yeah, see, my journey into Aryaka also, I feel, was somewhat of a conscious design. You know, while the company itself was a bit serendipitous, I was very clear in terms of the stage of the company I wanted to be in. In the last 20 years, you know, I spent about 6 years at Nortel, heading up product management roles, and then about close to a decade at Cisco in various aspects of marketing. Then when I left Cisco, I wanted to go to an early stage startup.
Okay.
And the idea there was to, you know, take all the things that you learned and see what do you do in an early stage startup that allows you to determine product market fit, go get associated with venture capitalists without the Cisco brand name behind you, right? So that was sort of the initial thing. And my first startup, you know, got acquired in about 7-8 months. Then I spent yeah. So about 2 years, 2.5 years, I ended up in a mid-stage startup where you're sort of building hardened routes to market. And in that particular case, the company was also going through a transition from an on-premises approach to something that was SaaS-based and going from perpetual licensing to subscription licensing. So a lot of this transition was very helpful. And now to take a lot of these and bring it to Aryaka, which is a later stage company, but it has its own set of opportunities and challenges in terms of taking a growing story, and as our CEO likes to phrase it, going from growing to growth. And so that is really where you take all of the principles and apply it to later stage in a way that you can now start to scale the business. And here I have ownership of both the product management as well as the marketing functions. So that allows us to have a very fun job in terms of defining the product strategy, but also ensuring that you have the right marketing motions to go back that strategy up and allow for it to scale. So the last 9 months, have been very instrumental in terms of making changes to both. We'll see what the next year, portrays in terms of how all of this comes to bear.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. So given all your areas of responsibility and the things you're doing with startups and advising, how do you maintain balance in your work life?
See, I think a lot of the work-life balance, the work part is easy, because there are so many tools to make sure that you don't run aground, and everybody's busy, so you know how to optimize. The key thing is to have a good balance on the family side. So, as I say, happy wife, happy life. Make sure your spouse is happy, whether it's wife or husband, and then devote some time to your kids. And if that is done and it keeps you grounded, I feel all the other things take care of themselves. So quality time with the family, the balance is automatically achieved.
Got it. Good advice. A happy wife is a happy life. Remember that. Do you have any daily rituals or habits that keeps you focused and productive?
I think I have 2 daughters, so I do make it an effort when I'm in town to spend as much time as possible. So weekends I'm their fun dad, right? And just getting involved in their homework, classes, and I'm also their Uber driver during the weekends. They feel connected, right? And very soon, the older one's going to fly away, spread their wings, get into college. So that part is a part of relating to your previous question as well, because you take every opportunity to make sure you're part of the family. Reading is another thing that I like. A couple of things that keeps me grounded, and then just calling your parents and making sure they hear your voice every day, though they're in different continents. That keeps you grounded as well.
Got it.
Your friend circle is very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember to call your mom and dad. So, what's your superpower, Shashi?
Um, you know, I think if I evaluate my own strengths, it's really being able to, distill some complex things and try to make them simple. And also, if there are a bunch of different things spread out, I'm usually able to connect them and look at the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
They are powers, I wouldn't call them superpowers. Superpower is when you can take them and get the rest of your team equally energized
Uh-huh.
and get the collective amplification out, and then you start to see magic happening.
Uh-huh.
And so that's really, if you're able to get that done, that's very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
It aligns teams, goals, purposes together, and had a few occasions where that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really what I'm usually on the lookout for, where you go outside of playing to your strengths and making everybody come together. Five fingers, how do they fold into a fist? That's when it becomes a superpower.
Uh-huh.
And you need to recognize other strengths and let them play to it and figure out how to bring it together.
Got it. Got it. Shashi, are there any trends that you're seeing that you're excited about as it relates to either Aryaka or marketing a product?
See, I feel the boundaries are blurring in a lot of the areas.
Mm-hmm.
My focus has largely been in B2B marketing,
Mm-hmm.
but we constantly derive inspiration from B2C marketing. You look at the Apples, you look at the Teslas, and then you see how do you want to apply that into B2B constructs.
Right.
And you look at our customers and ourselves as consumers as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have that expectation of consumer expectation now wanting to come on to the B2B fence, and you see the boundaries blurring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one trend that I'm constantly evaluating and see how do you bring that consumer experience, not in terms of the quality, but really the wow effect,
Mm-hmm.
and apply that into our marketing, our products, and just generate that wow effect.
Right.
I think the second aspect that is really happening is the democratization of things, where you look at choice, right? And whether it be a multi-cloud offering, or whether it be any place where now customers have choice and they're saying, I'm going to bring these things together,
Mm-hmm.
and applying that to marketing principles as well. How do you reconcile this notion of democratization and yet be able to offer something that they feel is whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from a technology perspective, I'm looking at what will happen with AI, for example.
Yep.
A lot of the marketing, as we discussed, it's a very nuanced function. There could be a logical aspect of marketing with the whole demand generation.
Mm-hmm.
There could be an art aspect of marketing with the messaging and the branding.
Mm-hmm.
With every industry now being proliferated by AI,
Right.
what is the impact it's going to have on marketing, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that's a trend I'm keenly following as well, and seeing how do you apply some of these. And I think the next wave is going to be some of this human AI augmented efforts in terms of how you go about with marketing principles as well.
Got it. As it relates to demand gen, branding.
Yeah, it opens up a ton of possibilities, right? Demand gen is probably the most intuitive, but eventually a lot of marketing is about detecting patterns, right? Whether you look at messaging, how can you expose a draft messaging to a lot of people and get that feedback? And how do you start to extrapolate that feedback in terms of saying what is going to work versus not? And so I think we will start to see these doors opened up. For us as marketeers, to get to know what is working, you try out different campaigns, you try out different strategies, because every company's marketing structure is unique, right? You need to kind of figure it out in a way that it's tailored to your initiative. And so that means $9 are probably spent before you learn where that $1 is getting properly invested. So that if you can short circuit that through AI, I feel marketing can be a lot more efficient and at the same time deliver more compelling value quicker. It's one of the harder functions to crack.
Right.
And so that's really what I'm on the watch out for.
Do you still believe that A/B testing or multivariant testing is an important part of marketing?
I believe so, right? And yeah, I think it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G sometimes, right?
Exactly.
Because, you have so many variations. And particularly for us, when we are looking at marketing that needs to apply to different verticals, different languages, global audience, different industries, and maybe different personas, the combinations become pretty diverse. It's very complex equation.
Right.
And so you have to follow your gut instinct in terms of where you invest and what you do, and a lot of it is setting expectations, saying no to others, and even the mix of what your investment needs to be, how much in terms of digital investment, how much in terms of events, how much in terms of other things that you do, content, right? So it has to be tailored. And for me, for example, coming in new to this particular job, I had a gut instinct on a few things, but there were other things where I just did not have the data.
Right.
Because we had a bit of a churn, and so there was nobody to give me the data and say, formulate your insights.
Right.
And so to generate the data takes time, and I'm always on the lookout for anything that will help short circuit that process.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I think, bringing it back to sort of art and science, as a marketer, you have to sort of have that gut instinct and be willing to test the hypothesis in absence of data.
That's right.
And hopefully you can iterate and test it quickly so you can short circuit it to get to a proof point, whether that hypothesis converted or not. And if it did, fantastic. If it did not, iterate until you get to the metrics you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's also something I advise companies in different stages of the company, their life cycle. For example, early stage startups, most CEOs that I know, they look for a demand gen person to get things off the ground.
Right.
And they're always on the hunt for somebody who will suddenly scale up their demand because they have a product and they want to scale it. And my advice to them is, don't go for a demand gen person. Get somebody who will allow you to articulate your value proposition and start to test it out in a systematic way. You need a demand gen person when you're ready to scale, when you have the patterns figured out to some extent. And but you need somebody who can understand the art aspects of it first before you apply the science.
Yeah, right.
And
Makes
as you
sense.
grow through
I
a
like
later
that.
stage company, then the science becomes a lot more important.
Sure.
It's a scaling function. So it's really the diversity of the marketing function that you probably need to understand and apply to different stages of the company as well.
Makes a lot of sense. I couldn't agree more. You mentioned reading. What are you currently reading? Or what are you currently listening to if you listen to podcasts?
It's a bit of both, actually. I have books that I carry on for reading in planes,
When you travel,
and these are usually lighter on the mind. Recently, I was reading, or rather rereading, Howard Scull's book, Put Your Heart Into It. It's an older book, but I got my hand on it again, and I was rereading it on a flight back. Really inspirational in terms of how he brings out the whole entrepreneurship angle with the Starbucks story. Then for my bedtime, I have more dense stuff, mainly because there's a process of introspection that's happening all the time, right? And you need something that will help you understand you. It's always easy to understand something external,
Right.
but for you to understand yourself, it's a huge work in progress. So more recently, I'm reading a version of Gandhi's Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is obviously this philosophical, spiritual book,
Right.
and it is Gandhi's version of it.
Okay.
And I usually read a few pages at night and then go to sleep because the mind's working.
It's a lot.
And
It's very dense.
you need time to kind of internalize and introspect some of those things. So that's been very helpful. And then I do have a bit of a commute coming into my office in San Mateo from San Jose, where I live. So TED Talks keep me going during the commute aside from work calls.
There you go, spreading ideas with TED
Yeah,
Talks.
there you go.
Well, that's all the questions I have, Shashi. Anything else you'd like to share with us?
I think I'm very happy to have had this conversation with you, get to know you.
Likewise.
And your platform as well. So you're doing your own version of TED in a way.
Yes, indeed, we are. We're trying to.
Yeah, so
That's
congratulations
Thank
for
you.
all the good work that you guys have done, and
Appreciate it.
hopefully this platform continues to scale.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.